In this video, we're going to be using the HTTP extension in Supabase to connect to the OpenAI API. So harnessing my inner Jonathan Nolan, this is the final installment of the HTTP API connection trilogy. And in this one, we're going to be connecting to the OpenAI API. We've already done sending emails and we've already done SMS messages. So as I said, we'll do those and then we'll do retrieving some data. And this is what we're going to do. In actual fact, we're going to use it for image generation. So if you haven't seen the other two, it doesn't matter. I will go over everything we need again for those that haven't watched the other two videos. So as always, with these, we need to start in database extensions. So if you go into your Supabase instance and you've got database extensions, and you'll need to make sure that your HTTP extension is enabled, so it needs to be toggled green. So if it's not there in the enabled extensions, either scroll down, find it and enable it by toggling it, or simply type HTTP in the search box and it'll find it then, enable it, and away you go. So the function we are going to use is this one. This is basically identical to the function we used for sending SMS messages, bar obviously it is formatted slightly differently because we're sending a request to the OpenAI API rather than to send a message. And there is one sort of minor difference in terms of the way we're making the request, which I'll come to when we get to it. Now, also, we are pulling our API keys from the private keys table again, like we did in the previous two videos. So if you don't have your private keys table set up, if you haven't watched any of the videos or you don't have those anyway or something similar, this is the function you need for that. So essentially this will create the schema for private keys and create the table with the key and value columns. And if you copy and paste this code, all the code as usual will be available. Click on the link down below. You'll be able to copy and paste all the code to use in your projects. So if you do not have that, this will be available. You just copy and paste this into your SQL editor, quick run. And if you've done it correctly, if you go into your table editor, go to the private schema, and then you'll have your keys table there. Again, I'm not going to open it because it's got the API keys in it, but if you've done it correctly, that'll be there, and you'll say you'll have key and value columns, and then you just copy and paste your value into the table against the key. So for this particular function, our key is the OpenAI Secret. So if you remember back, if you've seen the other two videos, which I'll try not to refer too much, but if you have seen them, we used Mailjet for sending emails, and that had a secret and an API key. We used Cinch for SMS messages, which only had the secret, and OpenAI is the same. You've only got the secret, so you got one key to import into your function. So basically, into our function called create image, we are importing as a parameter the image description. So we have to tell the OpenAI API what we want to do, and that will be obviously the description of the image. So we will go through this and we'll create an image, and you'll see it. You'll see it when we get to it. And then we're declaring the variables which we need to make the request, and obviously the OpenAI secret one's there. So so essentially start off by pulling the OpenAI secret value into the OpenAI secret variable from the private keys table. That's what we're doing in that line, and then which we use in the headers of our API request. Then the next thing we do is build the content of the API request. So if we head over to the GitHub project for the HTTP extension, you will remember that if you scroll down the README file, we've got the request set up, how we need to make the request. So we've got the method of the request, which is post, get, etc. We've got the URL endpoint, the API endpoint. We've got the headers, which is where we put our API keys. We've got the content type, and we've got the content itself. So that's what we need to put in the request to make it up. So if we go back to Supabase, the content itself is going into the JSON content variable. I'm using the JSON build object function within Supabase to do this. And then the way OpenAI wants this is basically how it's set up. So if we go to the OpenAI docs now, and we'll have a look at what all this means. So this is the API request for an image, which is basically what we're doing. We're creating an image using the DALL-E 3 model. Now your OpenAI keys that we put in our headers, which obviously is our OpenAI Secret. Once you're signed up and you've got your account, if you go, this is where you create your new API keys. So when you go API keys, it'll be create a new secret, and I've created one for the image API, obviously. So this way they come, and once they've created, you have to copy and paste them then, because it doesn't show you them again. So once you've created it, you'll have to copy and paste it into somewhere else, maybe directly into your private keys table, or just into an email or something, just until you've used it, and then obviously delete it. So yeah, so this is where you get your keys from on the API section of the OpenAI website. Just a side note on the OpenAI requests, when you sign up, if you've not already got an account with OpenAI, when you sign up, you get some free, I think it's $5 of credits to use with the API. I don't think they work with DALL-E 3. I think you have to. I actually couldn't get it to work. I kept getting a timeout, so I kept getting a too many requests error. So it says that you've got 0 of 1 per minute available, and you're trying to make 1 of 1 requests if you don't put some actual credits. So I had to put $10 of credits on to get it to work. I think you can put $5 on, so it's not an expensive thing to try. And the images are something like 4 cents each to create, so it's not an expensive thing to play with. But just bear in mind, if you try it using just the free credits you get when you sign up, and you get an error saying you've made too many requests even though you're only making 1, it's probably because the DALL-E 3 model only works with paid credits. I believe you can use the DALL-E 2 model with the free credits. So again, just something to bear in mind, something you might want to play with. Right, okay. So this is how the OpenAI API expects to get your requests for creating images. So its method is post, and we've got the API endpoint there, and then obviously the prompt is required, and then these are basically all optional values. What we need to put in there, we've got which model we're using, the number of images to generate. Now for DALL-E 3, which is the most up-to-date model, only n equals 1, which is this one here. I'll show it in the SQL section in a second. That's n equals 1 is the default anyway. The quality and the response format we want it in, and the size of the ones we're using. So if we go over to back to Supabase, in our JSON content we're using the DALL-E 3 model, the n times 1, so that's the number of images it's going to create, which is, as I just said, is the default for DALL-E 3. You can go up to 10, I believe, for DALL-E 2. We're going for a 1024 by 1024 size, and our response format we're going to get is a URL for the image. Now the URLs, I believe, last 60 minutes or so once they've been created. And then our prompt, so the prompt is the description, which is what we're bringing into the function as a parameter. So that's how the content's set up. And then if you remember, going to the actual constructing the rest of the HTTP request, the method itself is post. If you remember from the reference there, the data endpoint is there, the API endpoint, which is again from the OpenAI. That's the endpoint from their documentation. The headers. So again, we're putting our API secret in there, our API key into the headers from the variable that we are declaring up here. So we're declaring up here, so populating the variable from the table here, and then we're putting it into the headers of our request there. Our request type is application JSON, and then our JSON content is this one here. So then the one big difference, I guess, with this one is the fact that when we're performing the HTTP request itself, we are setting a timeout of 45 seconds. So HTTP extension has a default timeout of 5 seconds, or 5,000 milliseconds. Now, when you try and create an image with that, it times out. Certainly, every time I tried it, it timed out. So 45 seconds works fine. Doing a bit of research online, some people are saying it takes up to 30 seconds to get the response of the image. So basically, I set it to 45, and every time I've used this, I've not had a problem with it. So that is a setting you can play around with. And then our response is coming back as a JSON. So when we run the query, we will get a JSON response in the bottom here. So if we go to create image, so I'm calling the function here, and then this will be the description. So the text we put in there will be the description that we are bringing into the function here as a parameter, which in turn goes as the prompt into the JSON content, which we then send to OpenAI to create our image. So if we do that now, obviously I've hard coded this just to do this example. If we were doing this and we're calling it, for instance, our Flutter Flow applications, we would send this as a parameter, obviously, from. So if we were creating an app that an AI image generation app, which is actually pretty simple to do, we would pass a parameter from the Flutter Flow app, which is pass a parameter into the create image function, and that'd be our description for the image. So we won't do a red sports car. Let's do let's do a cabin in the woods as our prompt, and see what happens. So if we just click run, and then it runs. So we'll wait for it to complete. And there we go. That took what, 10-15 seconds probably. Normally I'll probably edit that out if I'm being completely honest. But in this instance, I sort of thought it wise just to leave it so you can see. That's the URL we're getting. So if we copy cell content, right, so I've copied this into VS Code, so it's a bit easier to see. That's our URL for our image, and then what happens is it revises the prompt. So we put in a simple prompt, but the OpenAI API does pad it out a bit. So you can actually there's some information in the documentation regarding this. So if you do a simple prompt, it pads it out, and it sort of makes an image to make it a little bit more realistic or more detailed. You can make a more descriptive prompt than the one I did, just a cabin in the woods, but OpenAI will create this additional prompt to your request. So if we open that, and that is our image that we've created with OpenAI. So that's how you do it. It's pretty simple to do. Like I say, there's nothing different that we haven't already covered in the previous two videos, particularly apart from the timeout section. The hopefully, if you have watched both the previous videos, the actual construction of the API requests using the HTTP extension now are pretty familiar to you. If copy and paste this, it's going to work. I use it on a number of APIs, and it works really well. So this system works. it works pretty easily, and saying that's sort of just another example of retrieving some information that we can bring into our Supabase instance to use in our Flutterflow apps. So hopefully that helps. If it does, I hope you enjoyed all three of those videos. I think they've been pretty helpful. So if you did like them, please consider the like and subscribe. It's massive help, and I will speak to you next time.